Well, welcome to Ninerology. Alan here. The game is just about in the bag. Josh Dobbs just threw an interception that got returned for a pick six, but then was overruled because they were down by contact. And what a perfect ending to a pretty rough season. Right now, the score is 40-24. The 49ers securing that number 11 pick in the draft because of the loss to the Cardinals. Now, let's face it, this was not a must win for either team. Both teams were not in the playoffs. But I think it is a perfect example of kind of just the misfortune the 49ers have had throughout the year. A lot of missed opportunities. You see a lot of backups that actually performed well. Look at Ricky Pearsall. He had some good catches this game, only to, you know, to not get as much playing time as he should have gotten. You got Jacob Cowling showing, a few different pieces here and there, and a few good returns, but also a few good catches. And so some of those things you'd like to see come to fruition next year. But we want to talk a little bit about this game, but also the entire season as a whole. Just to talk about some things. Again, this is one of those games where you weren't really looking forward to watching it, but as a true 49ers fan, you're going to watch it anyway. They're not playing for anything. Both teams aren't playing for anything. In fact, both coaches aren't getting let go after the season. We know that Kyle Shanahan's going to be back. We know Jonathan Gannon for the Cardinals is going to be back. But really, it's for the players. Like, who's going to be back next year? If there's somebody that's been on the bubble, you're looking at the trenches mainly, especially for the 49ers, who's got some promise and some players that this is going to be their last game in a 49ers uniform. Well, let's talk about a few things that look good. Despite this game not being exciting, you know who made it exciting? Jawan Jennings. Jawan Jennings, high energy, high impact. He really he plays all out every single game. You love to see it. You love that intensity. But unfortunately, he got a little too intense and got himself thrown out of the game 25 yards short of getting 1,000 yards receiving, which is really unfortunate and just kind of encapsulates the entire season with just what if or just not enough, which is what the 49ers had. Just not enough to end the game, not enough to get over the hump. And I think that kind of was a perfect ending to the Niners season because Juwan Jennings, who's played lights out this year, who's already outplayed his contract that he just signed at the beginning of the year, missed out on 1,000 yards because he got ejected from the game. You know who else looked good? Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall, we mentioned last week, had a breakout game. This week playing with Joshua Dobbs, the backup, which has really played third string all year, but they decided to start this game. Ricky Pearsall did great. Strong hands. He had that touchdown right across the middle where he held on tight. And you love to see that because I want to see what he's going to do next year opposite Brandon Ayuk. What is that going to do for his confidence level now, ending in back-to-back weeks with a touchdown? Really good showing. Isaac Garendo. Let's talk about Isaac Garendo a little bit. Isaac Garendo, your heart goes out to him. Messed up his leg. We don't know how bad that is, but we saw he got carted off the field. Is that going to be long term? Is he going to be able to be the backup? Even if he comes back healthy enough next year, he's proven that he can't stay healthy long term. He's gotten hurt multiple times. Patrick Taylor has had to spell him. And so the 49ers are going to have to address that running back position. You think of Jordan Mason, how well he started off the year. Obviously, he's out for the rest of the year, but he is a restricted free agent. Will he be back? I think the 49ers would be dumb not to try to bring him back. He's a restricted free agent. What does that mean? That means the 49ers still have some rights to him. They can tender him with a second round pick. What does that mean? That means that they have to guarantee at least $4.5 million to him next year, or 110% of what he got paid this past year. So 4.5 million, which is I think is a bargain. I think any team would probably come knocking on the door willing to give up a second round pick for somebody of Jordan Mason's caliber who doesn't have a lot of wear and tear on his body. And so, but I think the 49ers will give that second round tender on Jordan Mason and have him back up McCaffrey next year. Now, again, another team can come and decide, you know what, we want to go ahead and take him. We're willing to part with the second round pick for Mason. But time will tell on that. But I think the 49ers would be unwise not to at least put a second round tender because if a team signs them, they're going to automatically get a second round pick from that other team. And so that only helps the 49ers cause. That could be another offensive lineman. That could be something on the defensive line. So there's a lot of room to grow for the 49ers. So I think adding that second round tender onto Jordan Mason would be wise for the 49ers to do, and I think that's what they're going to do. And if he ends up re-signing with the 49ers, you have your 1-2 punch. I think you still need to keep an eye on Garendo. There's a lot of injuries that are happening there. We know even through his college career, he only started one game in college. He was a backup there, so I think there's a lot of wear and tear, and he can't stay healthy. He hasn't proven that in his rookie year. And so I think you need to, if you can't bring back Mason, you need to pick somebody else up. Whether that's a Raheem Mostert from the Dolphins, who probably won't be returning there, whether you bring back that familiar face or you address that in the draft. But somebody needs to help back up and spell Christian McCaffrey. You can't have him carrying 300 times throughout the entire season. So I think there are a lot of things that need to happen there. You know who else showed great promise today and who's played great the entire year? For me, he's my rookie of the year. Not Malik Mustafa. While he's up there, I see him as a 1B. Renardo Green. Renardo Green, who I believe has been the rookie MVP on defense, has really shown out and has honestly made Charvarius Ward expendable for next year. Charvarius Ward, one of top 3 corners in the entire league when playing. In fact, last year he was top 3 corner. This year, your heart goes out to him and his family. They lost a child, and then a couple months later, they had a child. So blessings on them, prayers to them. But he's going to be a free agent this year, unrestricted free agent, which means he could sign with any team. He could re-sign with the 49ers. But let's be honest, the 49ers just re-signed Diamador Lenore for $18 million a year. I don't see them paying 2 top corners, especially when you have to pay Brock Purdy. You have to figure out what are you going to do with Debo. You need to rebuild both sides of the trenches. Unless he's willing to sign a very team-friendly deal, which I don't think that's the case, I think you need to go with Renardo Green with how well he's played. That way you have a corner, starting corner on the opposite side on a rookie deal, and you have Diamador Lenore. Now you're still going to need to address the corner spot. Do you bring back Isaac Yadam? Do you roll with Rock Ya-Sin? Or do you bring somebody else in? Maybe it's something you address in the draft, because when you're going against 3 wide receiver sets, that's when Diamador Lenore comes down into the slot. So you need to have that third guy that you can trust. And that's what the 49ers had this year, which is unfortunate because their secondary has been their strongest area on the defense. And it's unfortunate that the 49ers as a whole couldn't make it into the playoffs, because I would have loved to have seen this secondary against some of the other top teams. But you know what? Even when they played the Lions a couple weeks ago, they couldn't stop the Lions, mainly because the trenches were all over the place. But Renardo Green has been my MVP as far as a rookie on the defense. And he really showed out today against the Cardinals, several pass breakups. He's just showing that the situation isn't too big for him. And he's only going to get better, especially if he has a full offseason without having to work about the rookie symposium, the draft. He can really kind of hone in on his craft. And I have big hopes for Renardo Green. Now let's talk about areas where we need to improve. And none of this is rocket science. Most of this, the team knows, the fans know. Special teams from Schneider. Schneider needs to go. Brian Schneider needs to go. He is the special teams coach for the past 2 years. The 49ers secured the last place, number 32 out of 32 teams as far as special team rankings. He's got to go, as well as Jake Moody has to go. I've been a huge fan and supporter of Jake Moody even since he's been back when he was with Michigan with Jim Harbaugh. Came to the 49ers. Started off this year great. He was 15 of 16 on field goals. And then after that high ankle sprain, it never came back. Now, while he has a strong leg, he was 50% on field goals since coming back from that injury. And it's not that he can't kick, is once it gets in your head, and it's a psychological thing, you never know if that kicker can come back. I believe he can, but you just can't take that risk as a 49ers team. When your special teams is already as atrocious as it is, you can't take that kind of risk on when points are involved. And so I think the 49ers are going to be in the kicking market. And honestly, it'll probably be cheaper to get a veteran. You had Matthew Wright, who kicked for a few games, who was great. His biggest flaw was he didn't have as strong of a leg, but he was pretty automatic from field goals. And so do you find something there? Do you go back and knock on that door? Again, there's a lot of options. Robbie Gould's too old. His leg can't keep up. So for those that are wanting a call to Robbie Gould, that's not going to happen. But the 49ers need to address that. I think they need to get rid of Nick Sorensen. I think he showed even in this game, there are several times where the 49ers were just caught off guard. They were out of place, out of position, and it's not anything that you want to see happen. And so I think the 49ers really need to figure out what they're going to do here. And so I would suggest that the 49ers call a familiar face in Robert Saleh. They need to do something about their defense. We saw George Kittle mentioning that. You know what? That we have a lot that we need to look at this year. There's a lot of things that we need to update, a lot of things that we need to do. And I think they're going to do that. I think they're going to do what they need to do to address the defense. I think that they're going to probably call the Colts on DeForest Buckner, which to me is a great call. Bring back a familiar face, bring him back home. He should have never have left in the first place. Bring him back home. Reinforce those trenches. And I think this game showed that. We saw the success that the Cardinals had on the ground and in the air. Why? Because there was no internal pressure. So even though you had Nick Bosa on the outside, you had Leonard Floyd on the opposite end, they just couldn't get that pressure up the middle, and that can only happen when you invest in the trenches. Put your money where your mouth is. If you believe that defense is important, you believe that defensive line is important, you believe Nick Bosa and the team is, you need to put people there. There's a few things we've noticed throughout this year. This game showed that as well, is that Fred Warner alone can't get off of the blocks unless he has help in the trenches or he has a Dre Greenlaw there. Hot take. I think Dre Greenlaw is a better linebacker, overall linebacker than Fred Warner. As great as Fred Warner is, I thought he was in the defensive MVP conversation this year, the first 4 weeks before his high ankle sprain. I think Dre Greenlaw is a better tone setter and a better overall linebacker than Fred Warner. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? I love Fred Warner. Why do I say that? Fred Warner's biggest flaw to me is he's an undersized linebacker that can't get off the block. If he doesn't have a defensive tackle helping to take on those double teams, helping to basically prevent the block to let Fred Warner roam free, he's going to get stuffed most of the time. We saw that multiple times throughout the year where Fred Warner had 3 or fewer tackles. Why? Because that interior defensive line couldn't take up those blocks where Fred Warner can roam free. Now, typically, even with the weaker trenches, Dre Greenlaw would go ahead and take on those initial blocks to allow Fred Warner to roam free. Dre Greenlaw is the stronger linebacker that can shed those blocks to make that tackle. That's why the very first week Fred Warner came back, he had 9 tackles in the first half because he's able to get off of those blocks. And so we don't know if Dre Greenlaw will be the original Dre Greenlaw. In fact, he came back and he was struggling with injuries and wasn't able to fully get back. Now, who knows? Maybe a full offseason, he'll be able to be the Dre Greenlaw of old. But I think Fred Warner needs a linebacker next to him that can help shed those blocks. He needs a strong defensive tackle up front. If he has those strong defensive tackles like a Chris Jones type of guy, DeForest Buckner right in the middle, I think Fred Warner then is the best linebacker in the game because he can roam sideline to sideline. He can hit the right gaps. But the thing that separates him and Greenlaw is Greenlaw can get off the blocks. Fred Warner can't. Fred Warner relies on his speed to get around the blocks. But when he can't, when they're running up the middle at will, he can't get off the blocks that he needs to make those tackles. And again, hopefully the 49ers address it to where that's not an issue next year. Hopefully the 49ers address the defensive tackle position to where Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw can do what they do, roam free, and make the tackles that they need to. And Fred Warner, phenomenal at pass defense. He can run with the best of them. You've seen him cover wide receivers. You see him cover tight ends. It's the run stopping that's the issue. You can't get off the run blocks. And I think that's going to be something the 49ers address by addressing the defensive tackle position. So for me, the big things after this game is Nick Sorensen has to go. Nick Sorensen, again, there's injuries, and that happens across the league, but multiple times in this game against the Cardinals, but throughout the year, the 49ers have been caught out of position, not communicating well, and that comes from coaching. That's not an injury thing. That's we didn't coach you up well during the week. We didn't set you up for success, and we weren't prepared. There weren't exotic blitzes. There weren't ways to kind of alert or set your team up for success, or really to hide the deficiencies. If there are deficiencies in generating a pass rush, you need to figure out exotic blitzes. I think there was one time in this game, I believe it was in the first quarter, he dialed up a stunt where Nick Bosa ran opposite side of Evan Anderson, and then Fred Warner went down the same gap, which was a great play to stop Kyler Murray on that third down. But we didn't see that all year. And so the question has to be, why did it take till a game that didn't matter for you to start trying things? That's what you try during preseason. That's what you start working on throughout the year. So when it comes time for playoffs, you are ready to go ahead and execute. And that didn't happen. So I'm kind of hopeful. I'm hopeful for the team. They're going to have an entire offseason to really address the issues. John Lynch says we need to get down to the issues at hand. There's a lot that we need to work on, a lot of details that we need to work on. And I think, first of all, it starts with coaching. Starts with coaching. Injuries are always going to be a part of the league, so that can't be an excuse. But coaching, coaching, coaching. There's no reason the 49ers should have the number 32 special teams in the entire league. Special teams has always been an Achilles heel for the 49ers, especially under the Lynch and Shanahan regime. So you need to address special teams. I think Schneider has to be out. Jake Moody has to be out. You need to pick up a couple free agents that can contribute on the special teams front. Second, defense. The defense, while the 49ers offense is an issue that we're going to talk about, the defense, you need to address coaching as well. You need to get rid of Sorensen. You took a shot on him, similar to how you took a shot on D'Amico Ryans. That paid off. He did amazingly well. But Sorensen, it didn't pay off there. And it's okay. Those things happen. You tried it. But guess what? It's time to make a change. You need to make a change. You had him. You brought in Brandon Staley. That didn't help. And while the 49ers offense didn't help the defense by putting up the right amount of points, the defense was caught out of position multiple times. It was called out by several NFL analysts. In fact, there were several different video just sessions from Brian Baldinger to you look on First Take where they're just picking apart the defense, saying they can't even communicate well. If you put opposing offense in motion, the 49ers defense can't even get lined up right. And I think that all rises and falls from coaching. And so Nick Sorensen, I think as much as we'd love for you to kind of figure this out, the 49ers can't risk that this next year. They need to retool. They are playing because they took fourth place in the NFC West. They get to play the last place team for the opposing divisions. They will probably have the easiest schedule next year, which is, we'll talk about next week and kind of expectations for 2025. But if the 49ers want to return to dominance and return to the playoffs, which they should based on the schedule they're playing, they need to really address these issues. They can't just say, well, we'll hope to be healthy next year and just run it back. You can't do that. You are already one of the oldest teams in the NFC. You have rising teams like the Packers, the Eagles. You also have Green Bay, or we already talked about Green Bay, the Lions as well. Their average age is 25 and 26 years old. The 49ers are on the north end of 27 going on 28. That's the average age. And that already includes, which we talked about earlier in the week, they had 18 players over the age of 30. And so you're not getting any younger, so you need to draft well, and you need to address those certain areas. You need to address the trenches. Now let's move over to offense. Joshua Dobbs should have been the number 2 quarterback all season. I don't know if it was a political thing. I don't know if because Brandon Allen was here before, that's why Kyle Shanahan had Brandon Allen there. But I think this game, even though Joshua Dobbs had several kind of boneheaded mistakes, whether it was a fumble or some interceptions, he showed that, you know what, if you put him at the number 2 role, he probably can produce. He should have started the game that Brandon Allen started. But I don't see him back next year. I think what he wanted to do was use this as an auditioning tape, telling other teams, I can be a solid number 2 backup. I'm not going to be one to compete for a starting role. He mentioned how he saw what Sam Darnold did and Baker Mayfield, and he wanted to do those type of things, but I don't think he'll be a starter in this league, but he can be a solid backup quarterback. I don't see him back with the 49ers. I think what the 49ers did to him, he's going to remember that, you know what, you put me at the number 3 quarterback spot, even though I dominated the preseason, played better than Brandon Allen. I'm going to go look for another place that's going to go ahead and respect that, the play that I bring week in and week out, and put me as the true number 2 backup quarterback. So I think he's going to be gone. I think the 49ers are going to be in a market for a veteran backup. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in Kirk Cousins on a veteran minimum or something very similar to what they paid Sam Darnold last year, and which could start a lot of conversations during the offseason that if Brock Purdy doesn't perform, they might turn the ball over to Kirk Cousins. So we'll kind of see what happens and where that goes. But Joshua Dobbs, I thought he played well enough to pique interest from other teams that he could be a very strong backup. I think he proved to a lot of 49er fans that he should have been the number 2 quarterback all year. And so it's unfortunate that the 49ers couldn't figure it out sooner. Again, we don't know why, but he played well. He showed out a few things. We saw Chris Conley make a few catches. He had 2 catches all year, and all of a sudden he has a few catches this week. We saw Ricky Pearsall showing out. We saw Jawan Jennings, the favorite target for Joshua Dobbs. Yes, he forced the ball to him, probably because as the backup, that's who you're playing with the most is Jawan Jennings, Jacob Cowing. We saw Cowing make a few good catches, and so I thought that was great. But I think the 49ers, it's time for them to turn the page on this year, figure out what went well, what are things that we should carry over, but also what went bad and what was because bad luck, what was because of poor coaching, what was because we didn't prepare enough, or what was a pride thing. You know what? Sometimes one thing that they say about the NFL is it'll humble you quickly. And that was true for the 49ers. You know, 4 years in a row, they made it to the conference championship. They made it to 2 Super Bowls. And this year, they completely missed the playoffs. They are no longer considered the class of the NFC. But the NFL is also quickly adaptable, which means the 49ers just as easily next year can return to dominance if they do the things that they're supposed to do. If they address the coaching issues, if they address the personnel issues. I think the Devondre Campbell issue was almost like a red herring of the season. Like, okay, this is what's going on. There's a lot of frustration in the locker room and there's distractions. And that going on was almost just like the pinnacle of the entire season. Him giving up on the team. But you know what? The 49ers have good leadership in the locker room. And I think even though the season didn't go the way it went, having Fred Warner and Nick Bosa play the last game of the season and George Kittle showed that, you know what? We're not giving up. Even though we know that we're not playing for the playoffs, we're going to go out there as captains of this team and show, you know what, we're going to put our best foot forward. We're going to continue to show up week in and week out. Why? Because that's who the 49ers are. And you need that mentality. You need that leadership through the offseason. You need players showing up and working out early. You need players not holding out because of contract disputes. Hopefully Parag, John Lynch, and Kyle learn something from that this year. If there's a contract issue, we need to deal with that early. That way the player is in here throughout the OTAs, throughout the entire offseason, through training camp, working on their craft instead of not coming in football shape because of a contract negotiation over a few $1 million. So I think that needs to be addressed, and we'll see what happens. If they end up addressing it, they end up addressing it, great. But you know what? There's a lot of things that are to be desired, and I think having the number 11 pick in the draft helps the 49ers. Personally, I think they should trade back if there's not an offensive tackle that's present there or a strong center. Trade back. Start building up picks. Start getting multiple linemen into the offseason program. And I think if they do that, the sky's the limit. You can come back easily to be the class of the NFC if you address and make the right picks in the offseason, get younger, get stronger in the trenches, because guess what? The Lions aren't going anywhere. The Lions have the number 1 offensive line in the entire NFL. If you have a great offensive line, you can bet your top dollar that you're going to be in the conversation at the end of the season every single year. If you have a top defensive line, you're probably going to be in the conversation at the end of the year. And that's what the 49ers need to do. Kyle Shanahan needs to address the offensive line and stop trying to scheme his way out of the deficiencies there. You need to address it and say, you know what, if we want to compete year in and year out, if we're going to face a team like the Chiefs next year in a Super Bowl, if that's our aspirations, we need to have a way to stop Chris Jones. We need to have a way to stop these opposing defensive linemen that can wreak havoc in our backfield. And the only way you do that is by getting better and stronger on the offensive line. And I think the 49ers can do that. And I think this offseason, having a full offseason, they can go home, take a breather, get healthy, come back with a healthy Christian McCaffrey, come back with a healthy Trent Williams, come back with a healthy Brandon Ayuk. I think the sky's the limit. Talanoa Hufanga, you got to figure out, are we bringing him back? I think that veteran leadership, that ball hawk ability, you need on the team. Now, he needs to work on his tackling skills because, let's face it, he is a liability when it comes to tackling. But do the pros outweigh the cons for Talanoa Hufanga? I think they do. I think if you have him, Malik Mustafa, you have a very strong back of the secondary, especially when you have Diamador Lenore and Renardo Green. I think if you bring them back, there's continuity there. I think you bring back Dre Greenlaw. He'll probably get him and Hufanga on a team-friendly deal because they're both coming back from injury. You make those things incentive-based contracts, so that way it's a team-friendly deal, but guess what? They can still earn their money if they show out. I think you need to do those things. And the defensive line, you got to invest in that defensive line. For me, if they don't invest in the defensive line, I'm going to be a pretty pissed off 49er fan, as I'm sure many other 49ers are, because the defensive line and the offensive line were the Achilles heels this year. Even if you have injuries elsewhere, if there's wide receiver issues, which there were this year, if there are issues on the secondary, if you have a strong defensive line, a very strong offensive line, that gives time for the quarterback to maneuver, you are going to be successful. Other guys are going to have more time to get open because you have an offensive line that can protect the quarterback. You could still run the ball with whoever because you have a strong offensive line that can make those holes for the running back. So I think the 49ers, if they address the trenches, they're going to be a 13-4 team next year. And that's very doable, especially with the schedule. But I think this game perfectly outlined what just the misfortunes. You know what? The 49ers, 47-24, their defense is atrocious. They are. They just are. And Nick Sorensen has to go. Schneider has to go for special teams. Jake Moody has to go next year as well. And so we'll see kind of what happens, what the 49ers do this offseason. But I think the next couple of weeks, we're going to see kind of where their mentality is. Are they going to address this, the coaching issues? And if they do, then we'll probably get some news very early that Nick Sorensen and Schneider are gone. We'll get some news very shortly if Jake Moody is out of the picture or if they bring in some competition for him. But I think we got a long offseason. It's going to be good for the 49ers to take a step back and, you know what, deal with the pride that's there. Deal with the egos and say, you know what, we need to get back to work during the offseason and let's get back to 49ers football. Well, that's all we have for today on Ninerology. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You'll catch us throughout the entire offseason as we talk about what do the 49ers need to do in the draft? What did they need to do in free agency? What are some coaching things? What does Brock Purdy need to do to return to dominance? And we'll be covering all of that here on Ninerology. Don't forget to like and subscribe.